there was a hard, direct clash between Vasseur and Togninalli. In today's video, we're going to see what happened inside Ferrari during the Singapore weekend, what topic they clashed on, and how these tones were used. But above all, we must talk about Luca Colajanni, a name that doesn't sound new because he is a former Ferrari member going directly to McLaren, and it's not an isolated case of members moving from Ferrari to other teams. We also need to talk about the words written by Lewis Hamilton on social media, which include a jab at Ferrari. And finally, let's talk about Red Bull and McLaren. Before we start, please leave a like for support. And now let's see everything in detail. It was supposed to be the weekend to bounce back, take advantage of Singapore, a track historically tough for Mercedes, and consolidate second place in the constructors' standings. Instead, once again the red car returns to Maranello with more questions than answers. Charles Leclerc finished only 6th, Lewis Hamilton 8th, penalized by 5 seconds. But behind these numbers, there is a much more worrying picture. There are brake problems, internal tensions, and words that weigh heavily. The SF25 started with the idea of attacking, but the weekend deteriorated right from the practice sessions. After free practice 1, the team had to intervene with emergency modifications that changed the car's balance, making it unpredictable. Leclerc stated it bluntly: the car has become difficult to drive, words that many in the box didn't like. Hamilton was more diplomatic, speaking of improvable on-track operations and a potential that wasn't expressed. Vasseur tried to see the glass as half full, emphasizing that the gaps with McLaren weren't so dramatic. But the fact remains, Mercedes and Red Bull had more pure speed, and Ferrari never gave the impression of being able to fight for the win. And behind the scenes, the tension exploded. According to Corriere dello Sport, after qualifying, Frédéric Vasseur reportedly had a heated confrontation with Matteo Togninalli, head of track engineering. The crux of the matter, the technical choices and internal communication. There are those in the team who can no longer stand Leclerc's public criticisms, considered unfiltered and destabilizing. But from the driver's point of view, after years of unfulfilled promises, the frustration is understandable. Charles seems less and less willing to be the media shield for the team. He thinks about the future and doesn't hide it. The real alarm bell is here. Leclerc, who has always declared his love for Ferrari, is starting to think coldly. If the 2026 project is not up to par, he might seriously consider alternatives starting from 2027. In other words, no more sentimentalism. There is only one career, and he wants to win the world title. And this is a heavy signal for a team that counts on him as a franchise man and doesn't come at just any moment. Ferrari, in the middle of defining the 2026 project, the year of major regulatory change. Stability is needed. But today in Maranello, there seems to be everything except serenity. And it's not just a bad race. Singapore leaves scars, technical problems, inconsistent communication between the drivers, and a pit wall with divergence within the top management. And above all, Leclerc sends a clear message. The time for patience is ending. If 2026 is not a real leap in quality, we risk witnessing a scenario that was unthinkable until a few years ago. Charles Leclerc looking for another team to chase the world title. And this could become reality. But how did Ferrari handle Friday in Singapore? Let's take a detailed look at the changes made to the Ferrari SF25, which served as a laboratory to test some configurations that will be reused in subsequent races and also for 2026. Ferrari arrived in Singapore with no certainties and the need to reinvent itself. The SF25 has always struggled in low-speed corners, especially when a sharp and predictable front end is needed. Marina Bay, with slow corners and delicate traction, was a perfect testing ground to see if there was room for recovery. Right from the start, Friday turned into a continuous testing session, changes in setup, ride height modifications, and different aerodynamic solutions. Leclerc spoke openly about forced modifications, a sign that the team was trying to find a balance never achieved throughout 2025. One of the key points was managing the ride height. The SF25 works well if it can lower as much as possible, but Singapore forces everyone to keep more margin for bumps and uneven asphalt. Ferrari still tried to push further, hoping that the new resurfacing in some areas might allow more aggressiveness. But the result was an unstable compromise. The core of the issue remains the behavior of the SF25. Understeer on entry and a difficult rear to manage as soon as you try to correct. To have a sharper front end, Leclerc tried a less loaded wing, but the choice didn't bring the hoped-for benefit. Singapore's straights are not long enough to compensate, and the balance remained fragile. At the end of Q3, Leclerc went all out with a more oversteering setup just to have a car that reacted to the steering wheel the way he prefers. It's a risky approach because it puts the rear end in crisis and increases difficulty in traction. But when there's no trust in the front, it becomes almost mandatory. However, even this did not solve the basic limitations. And another chronic difficulty of Ferrari has emerged, namely knowing how to exploit the soft tires. In Singapore, the script repeated itself. Little evolution between Q1 and Q3, tires that never reached the right temperature window, and thus no extra pace when it's really needed. The loss of temperature during stops, as happened again this time, worsens everything. And on a track where immediate grip is crucial, every detail becomes a burden. The SF25 suffered brake overheating issues even more noticeably than usual, also due to smaller air intakes compared to its rivals. And this created a thermal imbalance between the tires, which then extended the problem from the rear to the front. The truth is that the SF25 continues to be a single-seater with a short blanket, and if you fix the front, you lose the rear. But if you try to protect the tires, you lose grip. If you look for more stability, the understeer gets worse, adding structural problems like delicate brakes and difficulty in warming up the tires. The result is an unpredictable and non-evolving car. For Leclerc, this means another missed opportunity, and especially the confirmation that the Ferrari 2025 has no hidden margin to unlock with a simple setup. Much more is needed. Looking ahead to 2026, with new regulations and a team already under pressure, the signal coming from Singapore is unsettling. Today, not only is speed lacking, but also a clear technical direction to find it. Singapore was supposed to be the point of recovery, but it became yet another blow that deepens the crisis. If 2026 is not truly a revolution, not only does the technical project risk collapsing, but also the confidence of those leading the team on track today. And for Ferrari, it would be a huge loss, far beyond the points in the standing. And the message Hamilton left on social media is alarming because it highlights Ferrari's state of crisis, but it also criticizes some discussions that happened off track. Hamilton recounted how these days have been difficult not only for the results on track, but also due to the loss of his dog Rastro, a constant presence by his side during the glory years at Mercedes and in the early months at Maranello. From this grief, a deeper reflection arises. After a difficult week, it's nice to be home, said Hamilton. I had time to reflect on my journey from Singapore, and the main emotion I feel is gratitude. The support I received reminded me that even when everything seems dark, there is still so much goodness in the world. A message that starts from his private life, but also becomes a glimpse into his new adventure with Ferrari. Because if the media headlines only talk about mistakes, problems, and disappointing results, Hamilton looks at what the public does not see, how the team reacts when things go wrong. I'm looking at the positive aspects on track. The media only tell part of the story, the one where we don't get things right or they don't go as we wish. But what I focused on is the other story. How this team reacts when things go wrong, how we get back up and start again. Singapore, as disappointing as it was an example of this spirit for Hamilton. The correct strategy, the increasing pace, and then the brake problems that halted any comeback. But the message is unmistakable. The team did not give up, and neither did he. In short, Hamilton turned a disappointing weekend into a message of cohesion and hope. It doesn't erase the technical problems and shortcomings of the SF25 that we analyzed before, but it reiterates that this Ferrari must not give up. If the journey is long and difficult, figures are needed to keep the team and fans together. In this sense, Lewis Hamilton's voice becomes a focal point. From here, we start again. And note that there's a change within McLaren. A figure arrives who is a former Ferrari, who will become the director of communications at McLaren. Let's see together. From October 8th, during the United States Grand Prix in Austin, Colajanni will become the new director of communications at McLaren, replacing Sophie Ogg, who left the position after a few months for personal and logistical reasons. For those who have followed Formula 1 for a long time, Luca Colajanni is a well-known face. He was at Ferrari from 1992 to 2014 and was the spokesperson during the Schumacher era, managing communications during the most successful periods in the recent history of the prancing horse. After a stint at Marussia and an experience with the Federation and Liberty Media in managing Formula 1 communications, he briefly returned to Maranello in 2020 as a consultant. In recent years, he worked in Formula E at the Italian Tennis Federation, and since 2023, he held the role of Motorsport Media Relations Advisor at Pirelli, where he handled communication related to tires and relations with teams. The arrival of Colajanni is not just a change of role, but a signal of strategic continuity for McLaren. Andrea Stella knows well the value of strong and unified communication, especially at a time when the team is trying to establish itself as a direct rival to Red Bull and Mercedes. Having an experienced figure like Colajanni at McLaren means bringing to Woking a wealth of relationships built over more than 30 years of Formula 1 and know-how matured during the hottest seasons at Ferrari when media pressure was at its peak. It was at its peak. Andrea Stella's McLaren wants to grow not only on the track, but also off it. In an era where image and narrative are fundamental parts of a team's strength, having a professional who can handle moments of pressure, crisis, and great success can make a difference. After a season where McLaren showed remarkable technical progress, the next step is to strengthen the internal structure at both the managerial and communication levels. Bringing on board a man who experienced the Schumacher era is a clear message. This team wants to think like a top player. The return of Luca Colajanni to the operational heart of a top team closes a circle and opens new prospects. McLaren shows a desire to grow with solid figures and historical memory of Formula 1 without improvisation. For Andrea Stella, it is a valuable reinforcement to give even more credibility and stability to a project that aims to return definitively among the greats. And this is a fundamental point for McLaren because yes, it is currently a top team, but it needs to structure itself to become strong also at the communication level. For this reason, Andrea Stella is selecting former Ferrari figures he knows well to strengthen the environment within Woking in McLaren and grow not only as a top team on the track, but also off it to avoid the mistake that other teams have made in the past of managing the track part well, but the communication part poorly. But let's see what happened to McLaren itself in Singapore. How come they didn't dominate as the predictions expected? With the Singapore GP, it's 3 consecutive races without wins for the McLaren MCL 39, a car that only a few weeks ago seemed to have a solid technical advantage. At Marina Bay, where Red Bull was theoretically less favored, a return to victory was expected for Norris and Piastri, but McLaren did not capitalize. Why? The problem is more complex than just a halt in development. McLaren in Singapore had a remarkable race pace, probably the best of all, but the final result was compromised by the qualifying. Norris and Piastri didn't start at the front, and on a track like Marina Bay, this means getting stuck despite a superior pace. The paradox is that McLaren continues to be very fast entering corners thanks to an extremely stable front end. But this very strength is turning into a limitation. The car is so front-focused that as soon as it's necessary to lighten the front to relieve the rear, the balance becomes fragile and the drivability worsens. During the season, McLaren has built performance mainly in the first part of the corner. In Singapore, however, the context was different. There were newly resurfaced areas, unusual grip, widespread understeer, and soft tires that generate a lot of rear load but leave the front end exposed. So the drivers struggled to find a balance for the qualifying lap. Norris confirmed it, things have changed. More work is needed on the rear to maintain stability and traction, but without losing that precision at the front, which is McLaren's key. With the mediums, the car was more balanced, but in qualifying, the soft was mandatory, and the choice led to a sudden understeering behavior that was difficult to manage when pushing to the limit. It's no coincidence that Ferrari has sunk in the same way, because the SF5 has always suffered from a lack of rotation, and Singapore has amplified the defect. Saying that McLaren is no longer updating is a superficial explanation. The package is still competitive. But on particular tracks, it can go out of the window because there is too much load at the front, a nervous rear end, tires difficult to heat properly. And for this reason, McLaren struggled in Singapore, not dominating as expected. And does this become a wake-up call? If Red Bull and Mercedes continue to develop, McLaren must be able to respond not only with pure speed, but also with a wider usage window, because small variations in asphalt or compound are enough to disrupt the balance. And precisely this missed advantage of McLaren enriches Red Bull. Because Red Bull still believes there are 6 races left, Max Verstappen is 63 points behind Piastri in the Drivers' Championship, but he believes because McLaren is not at the top of its form at the moment, given the last 3 races. Mercedes is returning to be a formidable opponent and can join the fight for victory, further compromising McLaren's performance to Verstappen's advantage. Moreover, if we add an internal battle within McLaren, since there are no more papaya rules, well, this could complicate the situation even further. In Singapore, on a track that theoretically should have favored McLaren, Max managed to snatch more points and keep alive a comeback that seemed impossible. And behind this recovery, there is not only individual talent. Hamilton Kim made a bold decision. Red Bull continues to develop the RB21, this year's car, instead of focusing all energies on the 2026 project. A choice that at first glance may seem like a gamble. In fact, Laurent Mekies, team principal of Red Bull, clearly explained the logic. Yes, the 2026 technical regulations will revolutionize the cars, and investing in the RB21 means taking resources away from a future project that will be completely new. But for Red Bull, it is essential to arrive at the regulatory change with tools and development processes already tested and fully operational. It's not just about giving Max a better car to chase a title that is realistically complicated. It's about validating every technical and methodological choice to see if the wind tunnel, CFD models, and new analysis tools are delivering the expected performance level. If an update works on track today, the team gains confidence to design the next car. Meki explained it clearly. It's important that with this year's car, we verify that our way of analyzing data and developing truly works. So when we come to build the Red Bull RB22, next year's car, we will have full control of our tools and we can push to the maximum. Obviously, this comes at a price. Every hour spent on the RB21 is an hour less on the car that will face the new rules. Then there's another aspect. Giving Verstappen a car that improves until the end keeps motivation high and reduces the risk of internal discontent. While McLaren has decided to stop developments and Mercedes has focused much of its energy on the next generation, Red Bull continues to push. However, the risk of losing time for 2026 exists. But for Red Bull, the alternative would be to arrive unprepared for the next technical cycle. So these Red Bull updates serve not only to keep Max in the race for the title, but also to build solid foundations for the future. It's a high-risk bet, but it's also the philosophy that has made this team dominant in this recent era. Let me know your opinion on all the topics we discussed in the video, from the discussion between Vasseur and Togninalli, Colajanni's arrival at McLaren, McLaren's lack of dominance, and Red Bull's continuous updates. I'm curious to read and respond to all your comments. As always, I remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and activate notifications so you don't miss any videos on the channel. That's all from Rasta. See you in the next video.